Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on Azure Healthcare APIs. Hope you are all staying safe and healthy. My name is Noor Basha, Marketing Director at FHIR Technologies, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. As you can see, today's topic is delivering better healthcare solution with Azure Healthcare FHIR APIs. In the next 45 minutes, we will deep dive into Azure Healthcare APIs and highlight how you can take advantage of the capabilities of these APIs in your health data workloads to drive change, improve clinical and operational outcomes. Before we start, let me highlight few housekeeping items. During the webinar, please feel free to post questions and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. We are recording this session and we'll be sharing you the recording the next 24 to 48 hours. With that, let me introduce you to today's session speaker, Vineet Arora, who is the CTO and co-founder of FHIR Technologies. Vineet brings over 25 years of experience in the IT industry and is a Microsoft Azure certified architect. At FHIR, Vineet is responsible for technology consulting engagements across verticals focused mainly on the Microsoft Cloud Platform. With that, let me hand it over to Vineet from here. Vineet, over to you.
No, thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to folks. I see folks have joined from various regions. Thank you again. As Noor talked about, I will be spending the next few minutes. Let me just bring up the agenda on what I'm planning to cover today. What we will talk about is just, what are the various opportunities and challenges that we are seeing in the industry in the healthcare solutions, right? Where does FHIR fit into that? Specifically focus a lot more on Microsoft's offerings for FHIR and clarify for everyone who will like to use that on the Microsoft Azure platform. We'll also show you examples of what we have done with the FHIR APIs. And if we have time, we will certainly jump over to the Microsoft Azure portal and show you how you can, within a few minutes, start leveraging the FHIR APIs. So before I get started with some technical details about the FHIR API, right? Let's just look at what are the challenges that we're talking about, right? And this is something that, of course, has been looked at being solved over the last few years, right? But still, there have been, research that has been done that as healthcare industry itself has evolved, right, with providers, payers, and all other agencies that need to, collaborate, right? There's a lot of data that is spread across, right? For you to be there at a particular physician, right, and for that physician to have access to all of your information that is relevant for him or her to provide you the best services, right? There has been evolution that has happened in terms of systems where they can fetch information, but there have been still a lot of challenges in terms of having the standards which will provide that kind of a standard data, right? There's a lot of interoperability issues, right? So we'll talk about what are the various systems and how we are, seeing that it is already in the process of being solved, and how technologies are also enabling you to build other solutions. While this solution has been happening at the same time, you of course know that all of these technology changes, right, are also impacting the kind of solutions that are being built, in the healthcare industry, right? Cloud, of course, even if there are concerns, from various, customers as to will cloud have the security. Of course, there is all sorts of security that has been made sure that it's provided on the cloud when you're deploying a healthcare solution. IoT is playing an important role in the last few years, right? At the same time, not only that everything is on the server side, edge is also playing an important role. And last but not the least, AI is all pervasive. So even in the healthcare solutions, there is a lot of reasons for how health AI can play the role. FHIR at the same time, right, as it is called FHIR, and I'll talk more about it, that is what we are going to be focusing on, and how the technology components are enabling this data operability. In short, it's a standard that has for connecting different data sources in the healthcare industry, but also exchanging it, and then you have to be able to operate on that data. And that's how we will see how Microsoft solutions are enabling that. So for each of these areas, you of course probably are already aware of it. Microsoft has the Azure platform. It also has IoT solutions, including the Edge solution, a lot of cognitive services that are helping in the AI solutions. And then what we are going to be diving deeper into is the whole Azure API for FHIR, which is where you can start leveraging pre-built services to enable innovative solutions. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's good to sort of just set the stage. All of you, I'm assuming, are somewhere or the other involved in the healthcare industry. If you're interested in this webinar, these are some of the terms that are important. I'll be using them. One new one that you may or may not have heard about is DICOM, and I will talk about the relevance of this as we go through the rest of the session. Right? HL7, of course, is the organization that has been working for almost 20 years to build a lot of these standards, and FHIR is the main standard that has been worked upon. And these are some of the other terms that I'm sure you're pretty familiar with. So let's look at where does FHIR as a technology come into the picture, right? In short, right, as I've already been saying, right, the philosophy is that you build a set of resources, right, that can be leveraged, right, by various systems as the information needs to be exchanged between those systems. The important point is that that information has to be presented into a very structured manner, right? And it is also to be in a standard manner so that systems don't need to do a lot of custom development or customizations to understand the system, right? Yes, you can say, okay, JSON is the format. Yes, JSON is ultimately the format that we'll talk about, or XML, for example. But how do you have your information about, let's say, a patient or a disease represented is where FHIR comes into the picture, right? So it's also making sure that these are open standards. These are not specific to a particular platform or a particular healthcare subdomain. It is all across the industry. So digitization, of course, has been happening, right? EHR, EMR, when those systems have been created, there are several of those systems that have been created. But now the need for having a simple representation of the same information so that you can use it in a lot of different kinds of systems is what is required, right? This is, as I said, a logical and a theoretical model, and we'll show you what that architecture looks like, right? And it is making sure that HL7 as an industry that has been evolving this standard, it's compatible with all the other legacy systems that may have used HL7, right? There is compatibility with those. So what does it a FHIR sort of a API or a FHIR means, right? It's basically a resource or a data element, right? So it's, and I'll talk about the examples of a resource, right? But it's like an HTTP. It's like you go to a website and a website has a URL, right? And it's as simple as that, that you have a resource, you have some metadata around it. It is also human readable, right? But of course, for systems to exchange that data, it is represented as XML or JSON, right? So look at an example of what a FHIR data may look like, right? It could be about a patient, it could be about a diagnostic report, it could be condition. As of today, I think the FHIR API is FHIR standard, sorry, define 120 or so such resources that can be represented by any a standard that can be shared between these systems. So if somebody is doing a procedure, like you have these different resources that the application could get and make certain better decisions, make certain next steps around it. So you have data, which is resources. You also need an API, which is what we will talk about, how those data is stored and then shared between the different systems. And of course, it has to make sure that it is not some proprietary format. It is not specific to a particular EMR or a particular system. It is using the standards of HTTP, RESTful, JSON, those protocols. So as I said, it's a RESTful API. It is always dependent upon login credentials, right? And we can see how the FHIR APIs will always require you. It's not an anonymous access to any of the information. You could also use different kinds of OAuth servers that you could leverage for single sign-on. Of course, EMRs that are existing, Epic, Cerner, but there are lots of other smaller EMRs also, right? They have, to have that capability to do both search and read operations. Now, all this is great, right? This is reality. Let's look at the scenarios, right? How do you use FHIR in different scenarios? And then we'll talk about how technology is helping you implement these scenarios, right? Scenario one is very simple, right? You have a consumer, you have some data stored, right? And you have an API and database that access it. So think about it, right? You're going to a hospital, and the consumer, in this case probably a physician, accesses your record from the central information. Nothing major out there, right? This could be as simple as your date of birth, your simple allergies and everything else. Scenario two, which starts becoming a lot more complex, is that there are other systems. There are EMRs which may be outside your organization that also needs to be brought in. Now, the idea behind this is that if you start using FHIR as platform as a service, which is where you centralize it into a cloud environment, right, that you can really focus more on the entire business problem that you're trying to solve rather than the technical details of nitty-gritties of integrating it. And then, of course, not only just information from EMR and some digital records, right? Now there is more structured data coming in, right, which requires mapping between the data. So as you know, right, in the last few years, IoT devices are sending data, right? How do you combine that data with your medical records and make sure that it is done in a secure manner, and you can build solutions around that, and you can provide access to that information. So there are lots of other information that the IoT devices could also be providing, right? It could also be not just JSON, it could be an image, for example, that some system may be providing, right? If you're at a lab or something, like how do we still collect all of that? These are the various types of where FHIR actually plays a role. Now, once you have understood where FHIR is, sort of a building block for any of the healthcare solutions, let's talk a little bit about how the Microsoft platform has provided different solutions, different types of technology options for working with the FHIR APIs when you are building a solution. First of all, it is of course making sure that all the benefits of the cloud are provided, right? You are not sort of spending a lot of money on a product. You are buying only what you need, right? So pay only for what you use. There is a lot of security that has been built in, so you don't need to worry about the underlying technologies of the security. You will see that when these services are provisioned, the local laws, the geo-specific laws, the country-specific laws, and the regulations, compliance are all adhered to, right? So you can be confident that when you're using these services, the privacy of the data is ensured, right? And it is global. The beautiful thing that you will start seeing is that while FHIR as a standard that I've just talked about is more about storing data and making data exchangeable, right? Once you have other services available on the same platform, which is in this case the cloud, the Azure cloud, you can start doing a lot of processing on that data and making your healthcare solutions a lot more better because you have machine learning and other technologies enabled. So let me just show you a very high level, and we can come back to this ever, right? This is what a typical solution will look like, right? These are all the various systems that will come in, that will be, having data, right? Lots of them. And now you can also think they are not always just healthcare data itself. You may have CRM, you may have marketing, right? There is ingestion that is needed. There is all these, annotations, normalization that is needed, and you have services for that, which I'm sure if you're working with the solutions, Azure Data Factory and others are already there, right? The core is where you persist and make it available for usage. Now you see these two arrows. Either you could enrich that by other services and make it available to the different kinds of applications, which are called the systems of engagement, or the APIs could directly also be called. And we'll show you both the examples of what we have done for customers in a similar manner, right? Where this API can be leveraged by, for example, a Teams app, right? Or a dashboard or a custom solution, right? And it may need some enriched data, then you can start using these services. Now we are going to be talking about this a little bit more. Now, like any technology, right? While FHIR standard has been evolving, the implementation of the FHIR standards on the Microsoft platform itself has been evolving. So I always like to make it a little bit simpler and clarify to everyone. If you hear multiple terms, what does it really mean? So let me just tell you 3 offerings, and we'll talk about each of them and how do they sort of differ from each other. The most important one you need to understand is that it's the PaaS offering that Microsoft came up with, right, which is all around Azure API, where it provides persistence, it provides an API layer, it provides security, all of it this based upon the standards that HL7 has done. It's a GA. What GA means is general available. It is available. You can go ahead and create it right now. And I will, if I have time, switch over to the Azure portal and show you that. Now, this is where you don't need to really think a lot about it on how do I use it, and I'll talk about what are the scenarios where you will use this. There's a second option which Microsoft has also worked upon, what is called the FHIR server for Azure. Okay, and you'll say, well, what is this? Now, it's exactly almost the same standards that, not almost, it is the same standards, but they are deployed as an open source project that Microsoft has published on GitHub. And the reason for that is that it can be deployed as a complete solution, and you will have a lot more control over, what you can do with the entire solution, mainly, for example, the database behind the scene that you can work with. Now, the term that you will start hearing a lot, right, is Azure Healthcare APIs. And what I want to clarify is that Azure Healthcare APIs is a superset of set of APIs that Microsoft has been working on. One of them is the Azure APIs for FHIR, right? And it is included in those healthcare APIs. And we'll talk about the benefit of that. And remember, I talked about DICOM, right? You could include additional abilities and everything else as a part of DICOM. The important point to note is it's in public preview. It means you do have access to go ahead and provision Azure Healthcare APIs workspace, as it is called, right? But do know that these implementations will be evolving and changing. But if you want a lot more production, you can directly also go ahead and create a Azure API for FHIR. So let me spend the next 5 minutes just talking a little bit more about each of these, and then we will sort of come together on where to use what and how we have sort of leveraged it in other customer scenarios. As I said, Azure API for FHIR, right? You can go to the portal, right, on Azure and provision it within a few minutes, right? You really don't need to worry about a lot of how the structure has to be thought about, right? What is it that I need to provision in terms of the database or anything else, right? So let me just show you in a second. I already have it provisioned, but I will sort of show you again also is if you go to Azure portal and type on Azure FHIR API, oops, Azure API for FHIR, I should have remembered, right? This is, as you will see, is something that is already existing. You don't need to give a lot of things. You just need to choose a resource group. You need to give an account, because remember, this is a set of APIs. So it will be created as Azure Healthcare APIs.com as a URL, right? And you, of course, need to choose which location. And this is the only thing, if you're more worried about it, based upon the standards that have been coming up, is it R4 or STU3, that's what you will use. I have already created one, and I'll sort of show you how that resource looks like. This is what the resource looks like. This is, for example, the UI, URL for that particular application, right? And APIs, and you have a database and everything else. Sorry about that. You have databases and everything else sort of provisioned out there. You can see you can have different kinds of authentications created. You don't have a lot of sort of control over the database, because again, it's a PaaS service. Behind the scene, you can start looking at the various integrations that you can deploy, right, on that. And there are all the sorts of information that is available to you, right? And this is what is the backend on how you start using this particular API. You will be able to create resources for any of these entities, as we talked about, right? And be able to consume information. Now, remember the architecture that I showed you is ultimately you will have to have integration with the EMR or some backend system, and this will provide you an easier standard way to access that particular information. So this is what I just talked about, right? You can create those Azure API. It is making sure that it has both STU and R4 version. I will not go into too much details for this webinar. Security and everything else is already ensured, so you can work with that. Now, why do you need to sort of look at using it, right? While you have, the basic FHIR API, which is based on the standards, security is ensured, you also need to be able to look at accelerating your solutions by including machine learning, data analytics, and everything else on top of those particular FHIR APIs, which makes it a lot more easier that you're doing it in all in one place. Now, where do you see a need for a FHIR server for Azure, right? And the simplest way to think about that is, let me just switch over, is go back to this old slide. I'm sure you have been seeing it for the last 10 years, right? This is platform as a service, but even within platform as a service, right, the FHIR server for Azure is something that you will provision, you will manage, you will have every control over all the aspects, right? And FHIR API is encapsulating all of this, right, for you if you are to just use the APIs. So if you're building a custom solution using the FHIR APIs, right, it will be more time consuming, it will be more effort to still use FHIR server. It is available, as I said, as a GitHub project. So you can go ahead, it's an open source project, right? Now, ultimately, the FHIR APIs PaaS service is leveraging most, if not all of it already. It's a server that you will then control. You will have to manage every aspect of it, right? It is not something that is will be a PaaS service, but you are basically deploying a set of machines that will be then still using all the Azure services, right? So you will have a hosting layer, you will have API layer, you will have logic, you can also use your own persistence. That's just another option that is available to you, but you have to think about the amount of effort that goes into building something like that, right? A typical example of a FHIR server, right, that is available on GitHub. You can go and spend time, and you will see how Azure APIs for FHIR is right here, right? And this all pieces, right, come together as your solution, right? You could use any storage that you want. You could integrate with Databricks, but it's not part of the solution that is out here. You could use functions, and that's how you will work on the solution. Now, when you start thinking about how Microsoft, as a cloud leader, right, thinks about introducing services. While Azure API for FHIR has been there for a few months now, right, there are always more possibilities. We talked about the edge computing. We talked about other services. What Microsoft has done is looked at those, all of the needs, right, and combined all of them under a single umbrella called the Azure Healthcare API. Right? And what that means is that you can provision other services, right? And you can also support other standards rather than just the FHIR APIs. And that is the most important thing to understand. So Azure Healthcare APIs, when you hear about it, right, it's basically created as a workspace where you can provision FHIR service that I just talked about, but you can also create DICOM services, IoT connectors, and they all sort of work together. It does have some extensions that Microsoft has implemented for the digital healthcare solutions, which may not be defined in, for example, the FHIR standards, right? Remember, FHIR service or FHIR API service, as it's called, has only the HL7 standards implemented. As there are more and more capabilities that are available on the cloud platform, ability to combine them with the FHIR service, like DICOM service, which is all about making sure that your images from the different systems are also represented in a standard fashion. Connecting data from IoT devices, right, in a standard. So there is an IoT connector at Microsoft. All of those together are bundled as Azure Healthcare APIs, right? And let me just switch over for a minute and show you, right? So this is a workspace, right? You will see a Healthcare API workspace. So again, if you go back to creating a resource, and instead of Azure API for healthcare, you look at what is all available in healthcare. Oops. Right. So you see Azure Healthcare APIs, which is in preview version, right? And I've already provisioned one. So again, it takes a few seconds, a few minutes, but just for the speed, this is what you get as a workspace. It's a blank workspace right now, but you will be able to, in the same workspace, deploy FHIR services, DICOM services, IoT connectors, and of course, there are more services that will continue to get added so that you can start working with each of those services in a single environment and work with those solutions building, which could combine data from multiple of these and give a single representation. Let me talk in the last few minutes about once you have these FHIR services provision, either as healthcare for API, you may want to extend it and deploy it as a FHIR server, or the best use just the PaaS service offering of FHIR, which will be the easiest way to start using. Where do you use it, right? So Interoperability of data is, of course, the easiest one. So you have different systems, but you will also start looking at, EMRs, which have FHIR APIs, but you may need to do some processing on top of it. There is also, healthcare ecosystem where you are certainly using FHIR services for analyzing a lot of this data, right? Let me just show you some examples of that, right? What we have done with FHIR services-based solution, right? You see a lot of these kinds of solutions where patients need access to their information, right? And they have mobile apps in this particular case, right? Information about the nurse, information about their appointment, everything else. Now, how do you securely deliver it, right? Because ultimately, all of this information is, in the EMR information, and then there are other information about, in this case, for example, the nurse's location. So it's a concept that you're able to track how far the nurse is. It's for a home visit in this particular case, and what do I need to prepare for it, and everything else around that. So it's like the Uber app that you probably are. But all this is enabled by a bunch of FHIR APIs behind the scene, which is getting data from EMR and other systems. And I'll quickly show you an architecture. That also gives you an option to provide like a command center. This is what we have built for the customer around command center, where they can look at the nurses' locations, right? Their appointment information, right? And of course, information about the patient. So the important point to note out there is that the single system that I'm showing you out here has access to different types of data, which may be spread across different systems, and FHIR API is the one that is actually enabling that. So a simple architecture, and I'll build this whole thing together, is you have data stored in different systems. They have an EMR which is using PostgreSQL in their particular case. There was some extraction that was possible, but then you look at building this FHIR API layer, which allows you in a very secure fashion provide that dashboard UI that the command center that I showed you, and similarly for the mobile app. There are other applications that we have looked at it, right? Specifically in the Microsoft ecosystem. If you look at telehealth solutions, and this is not something that I think has been, something every organization is starting to have telehealth, right? Every provider, but Azure FHIR APIs is also the underlying solution for the one that we have built, right? And you can actually look at a Teams-based application where you can have telehealth, the doctor, all of these informations, right, about the calendar, about your appointments. All this data that you're getting, right, is getting from the FHIR APIs. Now, you don't need to really think about how the actual data is stored behind the scene, because Azure FHIR API makes it into a standard format and ease for accessing it. So you could just focus on what is the UI that I need to think about building this UI, and I can do both the read, search, and maybe a save operation back into the system if it is allowed out there, right? So a simple sort of an architecture around that. You could have any of the EMR systems that we talked about, the FHIR API that we have built. We have built the UI in this particular case using Power Platform that I'm sure you're looking at or you're already aware of it. If you're not using it, you could use it just as a web solution. You could have it as a mobile app, but this is where you have the logic built in, but this is where it encapsulates the entire functionality. And I'm sure in one of the follow-up webinars, we will be able to go deeper into it, or if you are interested to sort of double click on this box and how we have implemented it, I'm sure our team will be more than happy to take you through more details around this. So I know we had planned a few minutes. I will give a few minutes for any questions that are there. I just wanted to sort of present to you the options and the possibilities that are there. We can certainly go into a lot more deeper discussion on this call. We have a few minutes, or we will of course look at connecting with you folks as you're available to answer any of your other questions. Noor, if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those.
Thanks, Vineet. Thanks for the wonderful session. Yes, I do have few questions coming in here. So the first question is from John. He asked, like, what all applications can consume FHIR APIs? Is there any limitations as such?
Sure, and I will probably, for the sake of visual representation, go to the standard architecture that I talked about. When you have to think about leveraging FHIR APIs, right? This is what I showed you out there. You really don't have any limit till the time the application or the consumer, consuming application can make an HTTP call, right? It's an API out there. So it could be a mobile app, it could be a web app, it could even be a dashboard, that you're building. As I showed you, it was a Power App running within Teams, right? You can start looking at even some integration systems which are just making API calls and just extracting the data and storing it. There may not be a visual representation out there. So in a secure manner, using HTTPS, right, and using the standard JSON or the XML format, right, you could operate with the APIs from virtually any kind of a digital system where you can make a HTTP call.
Thanks, Vineet. So another question from Mark. So he asked, like, what should I start using Azure FHIR APIs or Healthcare APIs workspace?
Okay, I don't think I'm very clear on the question, but
because yeah, so let me clarify. So you did show about Azure FHIR APIs or also the Healthcare APIs for workspace. So where should we start using these APIs?
Sure. So let me again emphasize on the point that I think I was making. Both of these services are PaaS offerings: Azure APIs for FHIR and Azure FHIR services within Azure Healthcare APIs. As I mentioned, and I'll emphasize again, right, that the Azure Healthcare APIs is a superset of various kinds of APIs that will be bundled together, and they are managed in what is called a workspace. So let me go back to the Azure portal. I think it will make things a little bit more simpler, right? So I'm not going to talk about the GitHub. I've shown you, right? This is let's go back. So this is a resource group that I have created. And what you will see is I have provisioned two services within this, right? One is just the Win FHIR APIs, right, which is the first option. The other is the Healthcare APIs, right? And what you will see is that that's a Healthcare APIs workspace, right? I've just done it for the purpose of the demo. That's not how you'll typically do, right? But if you were to just use the FHIR APIs as the core of your solution, right, and integrate with EMR or integrate with other systems, right, you can easily provision just the FHIR APIs, and then you have all of these functionalities available. You will have the HTTPS URL available. You don't need to worry about the underlying data store and everything else, right? But you will only be able to operate with systems, data, and the integration which leverages FHIR as the standard, right? When you have a lot more complex solution, right? When you have to think about more larger solutions, that's when you will create a Healthcare API workspace, which, as I said, right, combines and in a central place, again with one resource, allows you to build multiple different kinds of standards and services together. So then you will have ability to do the same FHIR service deployment, right? You can add a FHIR service here, and you can add multiple FHIR services out here, but they will get created under that particular workspace. And if you see the URL, right, it's Win Healthcare APIs, and whatever is the name you have given, .FHIR, not this thing. So it remains under the context of that one particular workspace, right? If you deploy a DICOM service in this particular case, right, that will also be created under that same, but they can now talk to each other because they share the same security mechanism. They can share the same storage. They can share a lot of other services, right? That allows you to build systems which are much more, wider in terms of leveraging different kinds of data. And then you can start looking at deploying IoT connectors, and I'm sure Microsoft is going to continue to add more and more out here. So if you have to think about, if any one of your developers, right, when you think about a Visual Studio, right, you create a solution, and then within that you create a web application, you create different kinds of projects types under that. And that's the similar analogy out here is you could create one healthcare APIs workspace for your organization, deploy different kinds of healthcare related APIs within that, and have multiple systems sort of leverage that. You can create multiple workspaces also. You can create multiple services within the same workspace, right? That's just the flexibility. But if you're solely focused on just the APIs, and you're not looking at a much system, this is a good place to start. Sorry, not this one. This is a good place to start where you will just have the FHIR APIs available, but you won't have the workspace, you won't have other services, you will have to build additional services for those. Now, server, as I talked about it, is a totally different ballgame, and we will need to talk about it at that. But I hope it provides some clarity, Mark, to you, but we'll be able to provide more as a follow-up discussion. But that's the concept that I wanted to make sure.
Thanks, Vineet. I know we have 3 more minutes, but I have one good question. There are two parts to this question from Monit. So the first part is, have you used Azure APIs to show DICOM images? And in that case, are they classified as diagnostic images or not?
In the solution that I was showing you right now, no, we have not. These are in preview, and we don't have anything right now running in production for any of the customers where we have leveraged these DICOM services right now.
Sure. Thanks, Vineet. I think that helps. Again, thanks everyone for taking time to join this session. Hope you found it useful and informative. Please follow us on our social channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, for latest information around on these topics. In fact, there is a blog from Vineet on Azure Healthcare APIs, which talks in detail about the whole functionality. You could visit that for more information. And if you have any additional questions, please write it to us at marketing@winwire.com, and we'll be more than happy to answer your queries. Thanks, Vineet, for taking time to deliver this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and look forward to connecting and answering any other question that anybody else has. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.